Hello, class. We are beginning Unit 3, which is all about poetry. And if you were to ask me as a teacher, what's the one unit that most students groan about, if it's not Shakespeare, it's definitely any time that we're asked to do anything with poetry. Hey, I was once a teenager too. I totally get it. Sometimes reading poetry is long and drawn out. Here's what I find though. It's the problem with poetry is that really often when you read it, you're being asked to say what it means. And there's been many, many times when no matter how many times I've read a poem, I still don't get it. And I have all the tools in my writer's toolbox in order to be able to do that myself or even just figure out what another writer has done. And yet sometimes I have absolutely no idea. And therein lies some of the frustration that many students feel when they're analyzing poetry. So I want to take a little step back and say, when we are looking at the poetry of others and we're looking at writing poetry ourselves, you always want to be thinking about what's the overall image that I want to use and what do I want it to say. How that can come out can mean very different things for very different people. So I found this great quote by Shelley, where looking at poetry as a medium in which we're writing is really important, because often what we can do, we can see novels and within an entire story, they can tell us and bring us through all of these devices that help bring meaning. And as we were getting into short stories, the very end of Unit 2 was all about making the shortest of short stories short. And so now we're getting into a medium in which it's even shorter than that. I will not be asking you to write any odes or ballads or even a sonnet necessarily, unless that's what you would like to do. Many of you will probably choose free form, as you may find poetry restricting when you're trying to bring about an image or invoke a certain metaphor, and it's just not happening when you have to worry about rhyming scheme and making it fit a certain form. But here's the key thing, is that poetry can illuminate one part of our lives and bring about meaning from that one very image that you create. So when I think about poetry, I often even just think about photography. I don't know if any of you are into photography as much as I am. Really, it stemmed from becoming a mother and wanting to capture those moments with my kids, realizing that the flash sometimes makes for ugly photography, and questioning what makes a beautiful photo. Sometimes I would step into a situation and just create the most beautiful photos and not really know why it was happening or what my camera was doing. It was only when I started taking camera courses and started looking at the tools of what I had and the technology started developing that I was able to create those Instagrammable moments with my kids. But I even got into sports photography. But in order to do that, I needed to be able to understand what were the tools that go into making a great photo. And so that's why I include this right here, is that if I was to look at a photograph, there's so much going on with that particular picture, right? Sometimes, especially if it's of my own kids, it evokes an emotional reaction from me. Sometimes when it's sports, there's a more passionate moment rather than it just being my kids. Maybe it's the success of a particular skill that a player has been working on and seeing that happen within the game. When I capture a photo, this is what's going on in the background. This is what I'm doing as a photographer. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm looking at all the tools. I'm looking at the background and I'm looking at the action and I'm looking at how they can pose or where they could be or where I could be as a photographer to best capture the moment. And ultimately, this is what I think that writers do, is that they're trying to put together all of these tools to convey a message within their craft, within their art, whatever that may be. And so it's only until we somewhat know about that craft that we can analyze and understand why it's good, not just that it's good because someone else says so. So what you're going to be doing is looking at in Unit 2 activity, or Unit 3 activity 1, you're going to be looking at both analyzing poetry, looking at the works of others and understanding the craft that goes behind it, but you're also going to be working on demonstrating that yourself. That's why it's Writer's Craft course. So I'm going to take you through Unit 3 Activity 1 just to see what we're getting into. But the real thing of what I want you to be thinking about as I go through this is that I want to give you some of the tools in which to figure out what's going on. Too many times we look at a poem and we read it, and by the end we figure, without writing anything down or taking a step back, that we're supposed to understand what it means. Sometimes it's a lot more in-depth than that, and we need to know what we need to do in order to figure out what that poem means to us or what we make meaning of. Here's the key thing, is that I'm in a different stage than you. So sometimes there's poems that have more meaning to me because of the stage of life that I'm at. Whereas for you, you maybe haven't gone through those. So your stage of life, you're looking at things from a particular perspective and it's different than mine. So certain elements stand out to you that don't stand out to me, and vice versa. So when we go through a poem, what we really want to do is not just say, what does it mean? But we want to look at the tools that the author used in order to be able to say, what do I think it means based on my understanding and my identification of those devices and what the author has used. So going through here, this is Unit 3, Activity 1. We've got a couple of spoken word poets. So we've got videos here that you can watch. There is no activity related to this, but instead it's trying to introduce you to the many ways that poetry can exist. And so there's a couple of resources here that I'd like you to see as you go through. And you can make notes on these or include these links within your writer's notebook if you would like. So here we're leading into a discussion. There is the idea of lyrical poetry, which is a song. And so what it's looking into here for the discussion is it's the same poem, whether it's read, whether you hear it, or whether you see it spoken in this video. What you're going to do is you're going to address in the discussion which medium. Did you like it read? Did you like it read? That you read it yourself, that is read to you, or that you see a video of it. Which one helped convey the meaning or helped evoke some sort of emotion or understanding of what this poem was to you? Because there's many different ways in which we can engage and interact. Myself, I often like to have it in print. I want to see how the author wrote down those words. I want to see where the phrases end, where the author wanted to bring attention to certain words. Often, and this is awful, but I find myself tuning out when I have to listen for long periods of time if I'm not making notes. That's why I often like to have it. If I was to listen to it, I would need to follow along here. In certain ways, I like videos because they are helpful in tutorials or making me feel connected to exactly what's going on. So you're going to write in that discussion which one you like best. These are good notes to copy and paste into your writer's notebook, as you're going to need them a little bit later on. As we go down, in the very beginning, what this was that you were going to using the tools that you have here and in the poetry analysis guide, you were going to analyze this poem right here. So I've changed it up a little bit. What I want you to do is to see what a poem analysis looks like. So I've included the content here, the analysis guide, the video of the poem, and a former student's analysis exemplar so that you can see how to pull all those tools together and what it could and should read like. So what are you going to do in this particular activity is you're going to practice writing your own. In Unit 3, Activity 3, there is actually a poem called Daddy by Sylvia Plath. And so what we're going to practice doing is after you've read the exemplar, we're going to make notes. So what you have here is a text of Daddy. You can actually look at Unit 3, Activity 3, and you can find the video of this. You're going to use the Poetry Analysis Guide, the notes that you made up top, and you're going to analyze the steps going through to figure out the meaning of this particular poem. I've also included a poem analysis chart. What it does is it takes the Poetry Analysis Guide and it puts it into an organizational chart so that you can find and locate those tools that it's asking you to identify in the poem, to put an example in there, and then to explain or articulate what's the purpose of that within the poem, what meaning comes from it. I believe that down below as well here is the poem that you don't necessarily have to go to. There it is right there. So you can either read it or you can watch the video. This organizational chart can be helpful to you. For some, you might find it more confusing. So it's totally up to you. But what I would like you to do is to record your ideas as to what the Poetry Analysis Guide is asking you to do, and to put it either in a document or this chart. You can make your own copy and just submit it here for feedback. Again, it's going to be on work that is due. It is work that is due in Unit 3, Activity 3. Not quite yet, but this is the practice and the build up to that. So really quickly, as I want to make sure that you understand, but I don't draw it out too much, that I bore you to death. What I wanted to do is show you how to take this and move it into that chart that I was talking about is included in there. So what I did is I went through and I read the poem, and then these come from that analysis guide, and I've just put it into a table. So what does the title make you think? So the poem was called The Black Walnut Tree. So what I did is I took that title and I looked up some of the meanings. So a tree in symbolism would focus on the roots. It's tall, it's strong, it means heritage, it represents family. I looked up black walnut and found out actually it's very expensive wood that could fetch a fair price. And last but not least, walnut in specifics is an allusion or a metaphor for strength. So I went through here and just put in some evidence as to the first reading, what I thought, and then gave a little bit of an example here. When we go through here, I was having trouble figuring out after first reading what the tone was. Don't be afraid to Google a list or examples of tone or mood or anything. These words do not necessarily come at the forefront of what I'm thinking about. I often have to look at this and then I can go through it after I found a list and pick out exactly what the tone is. So don't be afraid to look up extra adjectives and describing words so that you can use proper and appropriate ones that may not be what you're first thinking about. I identified that it's free verse, it's no rhyme, and then just a little bit here, it might do you some benefit to look up what's the purpose of those particular things when you're looking at poetry. What does short sentences mean? What does it mean if they're longer or drawn out or have an iambic pentameter or a meter in which you read it? This one had no rhyme and it was very short phrases, which leads me to feel like there's a conflict or the protagonist is short of breath, that they're panicked. And so that would lead into here where there's a debate or a decision and a conflict of what needs to happen. So what I want you to do in Unit 3, Activity 1, is go through, this is just an example, and I can post a link to this so that you can see this in the newsfeed. Go through, and you're not necessarily coming up with that meaning quite yet. If you understand the meaning of the poem Daddy, then that's great, but really what you're doing is trying to break it down, trying to figure out all the tools to come up with that meaning at the end.